If you are feeling burnt out or stuck in a job that you really just don't enjoy anymore, this is your episode. Today I'm joined by Duffy, also known as Scrubs2Estates. Ian spent 8 years as a travel nurse, and just a few months ago, he made the jump to leave nursing and go full-time into real estate investing and multifamily development. Ian is the first nurse on the show, and I really resonate with him and his story. In a way, it feels as though I'm getting the chance to talk to my future self, especially since I'm getting prepped to leave nursing by the end of next year as well. So, Ian, I'm super pumped. Thanks for hopping on the show.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's an honor, dude. Honestly, thank you for those little accolades there. I just hope we give a lot of value to our listeners today. And yeah, my mission is just always to find that person who was me, who is you, who is them. Our fellow comrades that are still on the front lines in the trenches taking grenades, and show them that you don't have to spend a lifetime in a career that really doesn't make you the best version of yourself. So I'm happy to get started on this episode and see where the conversation goes.
I'm super excited to get into the nursing background and all that stuff, but really quick, bird's eye view, what are you doing today?
Yeah, great question. So my full-time job is I'm a real estate developer. So essentially, I started investing in real estate a couple of years ago, had some bad investments. That was actually one of the best things that happened to me. Losing money forced me to kind of learn the game. So I switched my mindset from earning to learning, and I got into a lot of ground up development masterminds. So through ground up development, I partnered up with this team and recognized that their biggest barrier to scaling was capital. So I'm actively raising capital, operating these deals, and learning the game. So that's my day-to-day job.
Nice. And at this point, how many deals have you done?
Deals have I done? Zero, but deals that I'm in, I'd say 5 or 6 actively.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these multifamily development deals, these are long-term plays. So that's why when I asked maybe just 1 or 0, I mean, it could sound like nothing, but in the reality is it's like you're in the 5 or 6 and it takes a really long time to get to that point.
Correct. Yeah. It's about anywhere from 15 to 30 months. So it is a long game. And we tell everybody, and as my partners told me from day one, buckle up, because everything that can go wrong will go wrong. It's just learning how to pivot and save face are really what I'm seeing true operators, that have experience in this game. No matter if it's, high, low, whatever the tensions are, they're always like this in the middle. Having the ability to control my emotions is definitely a skill that I'm working on day to day, along with patience. But yeah, it's a long game for sure.
Yeah. And that's one thing I agree with also is you can't predict anything. I mean, you can do calculated actions and all this different things, but at the end of the day, like you said, the ability to pivot and learn from the mistakes is what's going to have all the success in the future.
100%.
So let's go back to nursing. So what drew you into it at the first place? Did you just fall into it? Is it something that you knew you always wanted to do growing up?
So a little context on my family. I come from a huge family of healthcare workers. My grandfather was this, local legend of a physician in our small hometown, and my dad kind of followed his footsteps. And my mom and him had actually met in a hospital in Philadelphia when my dad was doing his residency in emergency medicine. So I have a lot of doctors in my lineage. My whole mom's side of the family, my mom's a nurse, my aunt's a nurse, my my grandmother was a nurse. So my parents always encouraged me to go after what I wanted to kind of pursue on my own, whatever lane I wanted to pick in my life. They always supported me 100%, but definitely had a heavy influence of a healthcare background. So when it came time to decide what I'm going to study in school, when you're 18 years old and sign here for $200,000 in 4 years of your life, I thought I wanted to go to medical school. And in the pursuit of that, realized it wasn't for me and pivoted into nursing.
What made you, what made you specifically say you don't want to do medicine? Was it just stories that your family had said or your father? Or was it just visiting the hospital sometimes? What was it that made you specifically choose nursing?
My dad always worked nights, holidays, and weekends, right? And I remember him always with this battle of having a family where you can show up to sporting events and take your kids skiing on the weekends, but I got to do my morning rounds first, and the hospital, I got to be on call. This guy's calling me, I got to go in. So I really saw the lifestyle early on. And I think the biggest thing that swayed me away from medicine, going to medical school, was asking his friends. I said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And thank God my dad had a lot of friends who were physicians, and they said, "Why the hell do you want to become a doctor? There's no such thing as having this profession and becoming very wealthy and having your own hours and all that stuff. The way medicine has changed in the last 30 years significantly impacted my decision, and they, thank God, gave me the right advice.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, knowing what I know now and seeing all the training that these residents go through, and you're expected to be scrubbed in the entire time during a surgery, right? You're not allowed to leave at all. It just feels like crazy hazing. And I don't know why. There's just this culture of just grind till you die mentality. And I don't know. I feel like I would never tell my kids to do it unless they really wanted to. I think there's just so much more life balance, like you said, with nursing.
And what you see is, I mean, you've been in nursing how many years, Lorenzo?
10.
10, gotcha. So we're kind of almost almost you got a couple more years on me. But you see that the people that get into this career for the money never make it. And that is so true. There's physicians, residents I've worked with, attendings that really you can tell just love the patient. At 8 o'clock at night after they eat dinner with their family, they're calling up their patient earlier, from that morning saying, "Hey, your lab value's back. I just wanted to give you peace of mind before I sign off for the weekend." Those are the people that you see make it. But you quite
Hmm.
literally look at the life of a physician, for example, right? You give up the best years of your life, your 20s. And then after your 20s, you quite literally work slave hours, 80, 90 hour work weeks to make 50, $60,000, barely enough to pay your bills and keep the lights on. So after this, after you've basically sacrificed 12, 13 years of your life, a lot of physicians don't even financially hit the green until their 40s. You want to start a life, you want to buy a house, you want to have kids. So your debt is getting pushed and pushed more back and back. So at this point, you're still retiring at the same age as the average person. So why does someone who's given up so much of their life in a profession like healthcare to help people needs to work until they're basically, on a ventilator themselves? It really makes your mind spin when you see that. So I think there's a societal pressure that says, hey, well, you work a lot and you're stressed out, but it's okay because you help people. But I think
Hmm.
rarely do healthcare workers get asked, well, what's the direction of my life? What did I want out of life? And I love helping people, but I'd like to retire early, spend more time with my friends, family, kids, etc. And I think we always get put on the back burner when that question arises.
Well, it's great that you realize this all very early on because I think some people just commit on this long journey, and I feel bad for them sometimes because I'm sure they have this pivotal moment where they're like, "Holy shit! I've already invested so much time and energy and money into this career when training several years," and I imagine that some of them kind of just feel stuck. And I know I feel like that sometimes as a nurse, but I imagine it's so much harder for physicians and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what you see with a lot of residents. They say, well, I invested, 300, $400,000, but more or less time. That's the most invaluable asset that we got. They're like, okay, well, how can I spin this in a profession or an area of medicine where I'm not miserable? I don't have to do. It's like, well, is that the question? Where can I go in this industry where I'm not miserable? There should be no misery in the industry that you choose to pursue for 30, 40 years of your life. So I think our archaic, I wouldn't even call it archaic, that sounds negative, but our idea of becoming a physician to help people has drastically changed in the last 10, 20, 30 years. And thank God that I was able to connect with those physicians that said, hey, listen, the last thing I would do is become a physician. Why don't you think about nursing? And that's kind
Hmm.
of what led me to that direction.
So, what specific route of nursing did you take?
So I wanted to go to nursing anesthesia school, and I didn't want to waste any time. So I tried to get into, I tried to pass my boards, get into an ICU as fast as I could so I could do my 2 years and then apply to anesthesia school.
So you did ICU for 2 years, and then you were a travel nurse. You said right for 8.
Yeah, I started in a progressive care unit, which is kind of an ICU step down. But the first hospital I worked in was the definition of the wild, wild west. Every single day, your license was on the line. The stuff that happened in this hospital, it was just crazy. You wouldn't believe the stories, but it was the most under resourced, under financed hospital in Center City, Philadelphia. That's served the underserved population. So I got a lot of good fundamentals, and I learned a lot of like good medicine there. I basically started in an ICU step down, and I needed to work for 6 months before I can go to the actual ICU. So I went from 6 months of a progressive care unit into a surgical thoracic ICU.
And then how long did you do that for before you started traveling?
Man, so I lasted 3 months in the ICU before I decided to leave. I was just so unhappy. I was so miserable. And we can kind of get into the reasons why, but I kind of left, went back to the progressive care unit, and then switched hospitals. And then I got my first ICU job.
What made you want to leave specifically?
The culture, the toxicity. I was just this young kid just trying to barge his way into critical care medicine and just learn everything. And I was fascinated by sedation and vasopressors and everything, ventilation, and just, seeing someone take a drill and go right into a guy's brain who just, got in a motor vehicle accident to just relieve the intracranial pressure. That was just mainlining adrenaline. I was hooked as soon as I saw that. But then I realized that the people who worked in ICU were the more experienced nurses. And one thing that I've saw in my 8 years, 8.5 years of nursing is that the older you're in this profession, you keep getting smarter, but you don't really get paid any more money. So these people kind of
Hmm.
get frustrated because after nursing, there's really two paths you can take, either nursing anesthesia or nurse practitioner. So these nurses that kind of stay stagnant, they feel like they need to haze or these ritualistic ways of just, training somebody that are not nice. And what really left made me leave the ICU is just the craziest stuff, man. Like people hazing me, old ladies stealing my lunch, throwing it away, like stealing my chair, telling me I wasn't smart enough to work in an ICU. They just really kind of killed my confidence, and I just knew it wasn't working and that I had to go back to a place I wasn't miserable. So that's what ultimately made me leave an ICU the first time.
Yeah, I see that time and time again. Some of the older units I've been in and current one. Yeah, I don't know why this thing exists where the old eat their young. I know that they're just unhappy with themselves and they're kind of projecting, but it's really unfortunate that everything happens like that. So you start traveling nursing and then you're doing ICU travel nursing the entire time.
Yeah, so I get hired at Penn. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of lied my about my experience, and I had enough to take care of sick patients in the ICU. Like I knew ventilators, we did those in the PCU. It was more or less vasopressors, which was new to me. RSI, like rapid sequence induction, which basically means you put someone to sleep to put them on a machine. So becoming familiar with like these practices and having more hands-on training was really good, and I had enough skill set to go to like University of Pennsylvania where I worked in an ICU. But shortly after there, basically had the option. I got approached out of nowhere by this nurse recruiter, and she said, "Hey, you can make $600 more a paycheck if you just come with us and do this assignment." And when I was making $1,700 every 2 weeks in Philly, which is basically just enough to pay my bills, that seemed like a good opportunity. So I kind of took that, and that was my foray into travel nursing.
And how was that experience for you?
So after I left Philly, I kind of got out of this failed relationship. I decided to fulfill my dream of going to California. So I had about 3 months until my license was processed, so I actually work in that state. So I decided to go to Southeast Asia on this backpacking trip and just kind of find myself, just get away from Philly, get out of this kind of bubble I've been in for the last decade. And then COVID happens. And I get a phone call from that same nurse recruiter. And she said, "Hey, they're going to pay you X amount a week in New York City. Do you want to go?" And I remember in nursing school, one of my professors, she was this woman that we were doing, what do they call when it's like biological warfare? We do some type of training. It's basically like end of the world training, right? You have hazmat suits on, you have to triage patients. And we're talking about how you put on like a hazmat suit. And she goes, honestly, like if it was 9/11 and I saw like, people dying and I have to run into a building, she goes, I'm not even thinking twice about my PPE. She's like, I'm a nurse. I just feel like I have to go. So when I got that calling to go to New York City, it was never about the money. It was just like, I have this skill set and I can actually make a difference. So that was the main driving factor to get me to New York City. But as soon as I walked in, it was like nothing I've ever seen before.
Yeah, I imagine it was crazy. I have some friends that were nurses over there at the time, and just everything that you saw on social media with just the bodies and of trucks in New York. I don't know, it is very crazy. So I really commend you for doing that.
It was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I was forced to, and I was very open about my experience. I had less than 1 full year in the ICU at this point, or less than, I think, 18 months. And they said, "Hey, can you run sedation? Can you run pressures? Can you operate a vent?" I said, "Yeah." So the first day I go to check in, they said, "You're in spats." And I said, "Well, I never saw a wing like that. Is there like a unit called spats?" They said, "No, you're in the library." So I go downstairs to the library of this hospital that was converted from a library into a negative pressure 22-bed ICU. And that was just thinking back now, it's just like crazy. It's you can convert this basement into this room that just housed this chaos and no one knew what was going on. There was no order, there was no structure. It was just pick two patients and that's it. You get report and then You're in a bag, a trash bag for 12 hours. You get a couple of breaks, but every hour really felt like impending doom.
Yeah. Going through these stories, you're saying it very lighthearted now, but I'm sure at the moment it was very shitty to say the least.
Kinda
So,
kinda giving me chills right now, man. It's I don't know, it kind of brings back, like, a little PTSD, like I would call it, where it's I feel like a lot of us haven't really processed a lot of COVID, but I just remember we're ripping like syringes, like 10 cc syringes out of these bags, and we're sharing pressors and we're sharing mixed bags of concentrations because there were so many patients inside the hospital that the pharmacy, just unprecedented times, couldn't keep up with the demand. So for those at home, when you're on life support and you're very, very sick, you're on all these drugs that essentially keep you alive. So there's one vasopressor, you're in pretty hot water. Two vasopressors, not good. Three, four, like that's the max. So when you've got four continuous drips keeping someone alive, barely at a blood pressure to perfuse their brain with oxygen rich blood, if one of your bags go empty, that patient just goes into a cardiac arrest and dies. So we basically were requesting all these medication refills, and pharmacy wasn't really filling them on time. So we're just going around and through the med port, just ripping out flushes and just putting into other people's bags just to keep these people alive. It was just hindsight completely illegal, but also just it's what you had to do.
mhm. How did you handle all that stress and burnout? Because I imagine it was just a lot to take on.
To this day, I'm still not sure. I want to say it was adrenaline that really kept you going without thinking about like keeping going, if that makes any sense. Like there was so much chaos going on that you didn't really have a chance to sit back and think like this is like this should not happen. Like this is the craziest thing I've ever experienced. And I took that with me. Working in critical care, you're always used to death. You're always used to patients passing. It's just, a thing of life that we understand, I think, better than the average person who's never been exposed to this industry. At the end of the day, towards the last, I think, couple weeks, and I was in New York, I was there for 3 months total. I stopped sleeping, I stopped eating. And I mean, at that point, I just knew I really couldn't keep going. And at that point, I decided to leave.
Yeah, one thing that I think I'm grateful for is just when I'm at work, but when I leave work, it kind of just stays there. And I'm very good at like kind of compartmentalizing the things that happen, just seeing all kinds of death and really unfortunate situations that we see for patients. I thankfully just never take it home, and it seems like you didn't do too much either.
Yeah, I think compartmentalizing is a great word to put it because you do what you need to do to get through the next hour or get to the next break or get to like the next, you know, 12 hours where you're in your hotel room because all we did is go from the hotel room to the hospital back and forth. Like the world was closed.
Hmm.
But, you saw it a lot during COVID. We didn't know if we were going to die. There's this new virus from Wuhan, China, and all we know is that we're young and I'm not a diabetic. I'm relatively healthy. But what if I never go home and see my family again? So I think everyone really did what they could to get by. And you saw a lot of nurses just really turn to drugs and alcohol and other means to kind of like just numb the pain of just going from work to hotel to work again. And I had met two nurses in New York City that I worked alongside of that actually ended up getting really hurt. One girl was found in a bathroom, like infusing a bag of Presidex just to, kind of just take the edge off. Presidex is a mild anesthetic or hypnotic, kind of however you want to, it basically chills you out. Another physician was caught stealing propofol and he was infusing that, which causes respiratory depression. You can literally infuse this stuff to get high off of it. But at the end of the day, the reality of his world was so devastating that he would risk, in fact, dying just to numb out whatever he was feeling at the time. And I feel like that speaks volumes into the situation inside those rooms.
Hmm. Yeah, what we go through is fucking hard, man. I've had many moments where I'm just like, this sucks, and I'm sure obviously you did as well. So, was there a specific shift you had or moment that really made you realize I need to change? When was the point that you were like, I need to go into real estate or do something else because this is not sustainable?
Yeah. And there's a lot of positives I had in nursing. Like I've had moments that really, really just impacted my life for the better and just like changed my life. And I do want to talk about those. But I have to say, when I switched basically So I'm in New York City at the pandemic, right? I can't work in New York anymore. I can't do this. So I get an offer to go to San Diego. Great. This is what my plan was anyway. I was supposed to go to California. So I essentially worked for a couple hospitals over the next 2 3 years, and towards the tail end of COVID the contract kind of died off. So now we're talking about making $120,000 a year as a staff nurse, which is kind of paycheck to paycheck. So I had switched to one of these hospitals that pay you, the best, hourly wages. But as you know, in healthcare, the really really good hospitals pay you the least, and the really really bad hospitals pay you the most. So I'm in about a year into this hospital, and they're using me, they're abusing me. I float every 4 hours. And one shift really was the deal breaker for me. And I was like, I just got to get out of this, because I got into this game to help people. And the longer I worked through this institution that I can't name, the more I saw that we were actually, in fact, hurting people. And I was working a night shift, and I had been floated from the ICU to a med surg floor. This young girl who was 18 or 19 years old at the time, she had, I believe, 10 seizures in 12 hours. So she was called by an ambulance, taken to our hospital. She wasn't covered by this hospital's insurance, so she was going to be, or excuse me, the other way. She went to the closest hospital and then got sent to my hospital because that's where her insurance coverage was. So 10 seizures in 12 hours. For those at home that don't know, when you have a seizure, you can lose your airway or stop breathing, which will then, likely could cause death. Here we are. I get this patient in the middle of the night, and it's about 3 in the morning, and the doctor who admitted her did not prescribe PRN Ativan. So Ativan is a central nervous system depressant, similar to alcohol, essentially alcohol in a different form, and it can stop seizure threshold, which basically zaps you out of a seizure. So I reach out to the nighttime attending, and I said, "Hey, I need a PRN order for Ativan." And he goes, "Oh, well, the day shift is coming on in 4 hours. They can handle it." And I said, "This is completely unacceptable. This girl's having a seizure every other hour. I'm not in ICU, so I can't pull Ativan out of the drug machine and give it to her. I would maybe go to jail, lose my license if I decide to do that. But that's what would need to be done to save this woman's life, this girl's life." So I basically called out the physician, screamed in his face. I told him, I said, "This is embarrassing. This poor girl, what if something bad happens?" So that's at about 4 in the morning. So 6:30 in the morning, right before shift change, what do you know? She has a seizure. We call the code team, right? They try to intubate her, right? To save her airway. Three doctors had trouble intubating this girl. And when we finally intubated her and got her out of her seizure, we gave her some IV Ativan. They did an MRI of her brain. It showed cerebral swelling. So when you stop breathing and you don't have oxygen rich blood going to the brain, your brain starts to die off. And that brain just starts to become swelling. The more swelling you have against your cranium, more and more brain tissue dies. So just because one doctor was so lazy, he could not order one drug that this girl desperately needed, she had an anoxic brain injury, which could change her for the rest of her life.
Sounds like a lot to go through, and I'm sorry that had to happen. Was it just the years of experience that you'd say that allowed you to just really speak up like that, frankly? Because I think a lot of people, especially as a new grad and stuff, you don't have that confidence to speak up and really advocate for the patients. Do you think that was just the time, or were you just so fed up with just seeing maybe other instances of this like time and time and again?
Yeah, fed up. Everyone's held accountable from day one in nursing school. What are we taught? Advocate for the safety of your patient. Comes down to that. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very simple. Do what's safe. Err on the side of caution. I'd have a patient with a heart rate in the 30s who is hypotensive, bradycardic. Why isn't this guy in an ICU on a dopamine drip? Well, I've been toying with the idea for a couple of days. Whoa, toying with the idea for a couple of days. This guy meets critical care criteria. Why are we not escalating care? And we can get into the
Hmm.
reasons why that doesn't happen. So yeah, it was a lot of frustration. But later in my career, it just, gloves are off. I'm going to call you out. If you're not doing your job, then you're going to be made aware of, you're going to be made an example of. And we're going to do the right thing here each and every time.
Yeah, well, that's badass, and I'm really proud of you for doing that because I think a lot of people don't do that, and I know we're taught to do that, but I think at the end of the day, sometimes it can just be a lot and takes a lot of courage to do that. So kudos. After working for these 8 years and going through everything you did, how has your perspective kind of changed in healthcare, especially from an insider's point of view?
I think two things. We think that healthcare is there to get us healthier. I think that's the biggest misconception. And two, people actually want to get better because very few of them actually do. And when you go to a hospital, you assume that you're going to be put in a safe space, right? You're going to get better. But I've been in so many hospitals where I've seen people die due to lack of medications, lack of resources, lack of timing. I did a travel nursing assignment in East Los Angeles where the doctors didn't even show up to the ICU. We did rounds on an iPad and they're like, squeeze their legs for me. Let's see, like, how much Lasix they need. So we're diuresing this patient based off my nursing perspective and my background, which I think is trustworthy. But you're the physician that gets paid $500,000 a year. You don't even have the decency to walk into the hospital and to touch the loved one of the person in the room. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I think what we think about healthcare is we go there to get better, but rarely do we see that outcome achieved. I think it's just progressively people getting worse because sick people make money, healthy people don't. So I think that's the biggest misconception. But I think the biggest misconception number two is that people actually want to get better. People always think that we're taking care of, Aunt Dorothy, who, has breast cancer and, she's been super healthy like her entire life. No, we're taking care of, I'd say 90% of the patients that walk through that door are just self-destructive.
That's one of the hard things. And a reason why I went to pediatrics, I think it was a lot more rewarding for me because with these kids, they didn't ask for any of these congenital diseases or cancer or anything like that. And so for me, it felt a lot more rewarding. But to your point, I agree that it's very challenging to want to take care of someone when they may be a frequent flyer who keeps coming in, is not being compliant with their medications or their treatment, and just maybe they're just rude or I don't know, just give you a really fucking hard time whenever you're trying to care for them.
And, like with every negative, there is a positive. And I think all those patients that, years and years of the guy who's the frequent flyer, which means like, you're racking up miles, like you're there at the ER every single week. You miss dialysis for the 20th time this year. You really don't care. And we're just spending all this time and money, but it really teaches you empathy. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
fact that you still give a fuck, at this guy's on his 10th overdose, or hey, like, like you're septic, like you came in, like, you have these diabetic foot ulcers that your podiatrist told you 6 months ago you had to take care of that you didn't. Like the fact that we can still show up and give 100% despite that, despite knowing that we might do all of this for nothing, I think is a valuable life lesson that nursing has taught me. I want to show up every single day with my best outcome in mind. Although it might not happen, I'm going to work like it, like I believe it to be true.
Well, I think you're an absolute badass nurse. You were a badass nurse, and I think if you ever go back into it, I would be very honored if you were my nurse, 100%.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate it.
Of course. So I want to switch up the gears here and kind of just talk about your mindset and the decision when you actually wanted to leave nursing. Did you have this abrupt decision to want to do it completely right away, or was it something that you thought you could do gradually?
I'd say every 6 months post pandemic, now the COVID contracts are just thinning out. I'm just, again, like going closer to living off like paycheck to paycheck. I remember like every 3 months, I would sit in this corner of the ICU, right in San Diego, and I'd have like a panic attack. And I'm like, oh my God, like in the middle of the day, like, did I have too much caffeine? Like, what's going on? But I just realized like this flood of emotions, like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? So I knew very early on in my nursing career in Philadelphia that this just wasn't as ideal of a career that I had believed it to be, right?
Hmm.
So COVID happened, and now when you're making a lot of money, everything becomes bearable. And I did feel like I was making a difference in the world with my niche skill set. So post pandemic, right? Like the travel contracts are thinning out. I would sit in this wow, like, in my chair. This is a workplace on wheels, just a little mobile computer. And I'd say, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I remember this would just come up over and over again. And then I'm going risk versus reward. Like, can I even get into anesthesia school at this point? I have enough ICU experience, but am I willing to trade $300,000 in 3 years of my life into a doctorate program that's just going to have me working until I'm 70? Do I go NP, which is what I'd say the majority of burnout nurses go, and do family medicine just because I can do a telehealth? Do I like family medicine? Do I think that's going to be rewarding? Oh, it's funny enough. One night I get invited to a dinner with all these travel nurses. We sit down. One girl recognizes another guy, put our tables together, and I get talking to these guys. They're like, "How old are you?" I'm 29. Oh my God. Like, this one guy, I'm really into watches. This guy had a cool watch. We had the same one. And we get to talk. And I'm like, "Bro, what do you do?" And he goes, "Bro, I was homeless, working at Applebee's, living out of my car when I was your age. And now I'm making like, 30, $40,000 a month in, passive positive cash flow." And that was my first taste of real estate. So the travel nurses went home. The guys were like, "Hey, come out with me." Like, we hit it off. So went back to an after party at their place. And there's all these real estate guys. And I said, like my goal was to just buy $1 million house, rent it out, fuck off to Bali, enjoy my life, come back 10 years later, it'll be worth double, and I'll just live off of $2 million for the rest of my life. And that was the first time that they were like, nope, you need to do multifamily. Nope, you need to do a house hack. And they started opening up my mind to think. They taught me more in 3 hours at this after party than most traditional education taught me my entire life.
Damn, that's a crazy story. And I agree. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so, yeah, I think with nursing, especially if you're at these high paying places, I think it's Stanford in the Bay Area and maybe some of the places down in Southern California, you definitely make the most in the country as a nurse, right? But you'll never, I mean, you could probably do the real estate thing very slowly, but I don't think you'll ever be really wealthy from this profession, especially like you said earlier in the beginning, how even if you're a very seasoned nurse, you climb the clinical ladder, you're capped, right? That's one of the reasons why I've been so like gung ho on real estate and business and all that stuff. I think when you're a new grad, you progressively make raises very easily, but once you get to like 10 years, it's kind of just like literally once a year. And so
Keep
that's
up with
just one of the most
inflation, and that's
frustrating
about
things.
it.
Yeah, it's one of the most frustrating things.
So that was the turning point when, I got this guy's number. I met up with him 2 weeks later. And when I had nothing of value to give him, this guy gave me the time of day. And this is a guy who's worth millions and millions of dollars. He's like this hotshot developer in town. And I was lucky enough to just develop a connection with him that he agreed to get coffee with me. And I said, listen, I think real estate is like my next avenue. And he just said, okay, well, like I suggest you just looking to get your license. And that's kind of what started it all. I got my license, thought I wanted to sell real estate because I saw my friends selling these like, $2, 3, 4, $5 million houses, making $50 to $200,000 on commissions and all that stuff. And I thought that was going to be my exit out of nursing. But it's so funny because, you make like man makes a plan and God laughs. My plan was to basically sell real estate, learn how to sell the game, and to exit. But in the meantime, I realized that being a realtor was the kind of the last thing I wanted to do. So through that journey of, okay, I got 2 years. Now I lost some money trying to invest in Bali, Indonesia, trying to invest in Nevada. What am I going to do now? So I kind of made this game plan where I'm learning all this ground up development and I just need money. So I had a 2 year game plan. Me and my girlfriend at the time, and thank God, shout out to Paulina, we worked our asses off to basically put away a nest egg, and we put that nest egg into our first deal. So went from nursing into, okay, now real estate is this 2 year game plan, kind of merge paths before I completely leave healthcare. And everything kind of went to plan, but the plan did change many times.
Yeah. I resonate so much with that story because I, just like you, I got my real estate license. I was like, this is exactly what I need to do to get outside of nursing. It's going to be my new active income. And then for probably like 6 months, I did it to the best of my ability. I was like, you know what? Doing these open houses sucks ass. And it's doing these things on these weekends, and you're pretty much working at any hour of the day, and you're for all these home buyers or sellers, and you're pretty much their indentured servant. And so that's when I kind of got into other things. But yeah, it's funny that you say that because that's exactly how I felt with everything.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think, your game plan. So it's like I started writing down goals, right? I started trying to manifest. And I actually just I wrote myself a letter like 2 years ago. And I said at the end of 2029, I will have $2 million in my checking account. And I will get this by, investing in real estate and blah, blah, blah. And I think back to like 2 years later, it's like, how small was my vision? How small were my goals? You know what I mean? So it's like you have this general idea, but that plan changes many times in life, and maybe it will continue to change. But I just know that in terms of my own happiness, this career basically is giving me a lot of the benefits that I loved of nursing without all of the detriments that came with healthcare.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
one of the biggest things I've learned in healthcare is just how good it feels to help somebody, how good it feels to walk into a room when a guy's got a bum heart and he's just had a second heart attack and he's just like, fuck, man, like this might be it. Like I'm having this surgery, I'm having quadruple bypass tomorrow, and the odds are like 70-30. Like they're not great. You know what I mean? So to walk in there, to make this guy smile, tell him a fucking joke, mess around with them, that was just like filled my cup. And it's like these addictive, like energies. It's just like you can't really describe it. It's overwhelming sense of just joy I have by walking in there and immediately changing someone's mood from bad to good. And so now I can take that into real estate and help change people's lives financially without having the burnout and the politics and the red tape and the metrics over patients and all that stuff. So I did learn so many good things in healthcare, and for those I'll always hold close to my heart. But my true mission in life is just continue helping people. And I don't know where or how I picked this up. It was just ingrained in me. That is my mission in life. And whether that brings financial success or health and longevity, whatever, but that is my mission first and foremost. So I'm glad that I can start to do that now in the real estate.
I agree with you, man. Preach. I love everything you're doing, man. It's super inspiring, and you can just tell just how you speak and the energy that you give off. It's very genuine, and I know that for sure you're gonna go very far in life. So
Thank you, bro.
yeah, dude. I just want to go back to just preparing to leave, because I think a lot of people like myself, I'm between two lines right now. I'm 1 foot in nursing, 1 foot in real estate. I know that I have this like year that I am preparing for before I leave, or I know some of the listeners may be feeling like they want to leave, but don't necessarily know the steps to take before doing that. And one of the biggest challenges is hearing opinions from friends or family. And so I know everyone's always like, why do you want to leave nursing? It's safe. You have a guaranteed check all the time. So how did you react to friends and family who may have been saying whatever to you when you said you wanted to leave?
And that's a great question, because one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the last 3 years is do not take advice from people who don't have what you want, right? And stop letting blind people proofread your vision, right? So for me, and where I see myself going in life, my appetite for risk may not be like, Aunt Jane's or, Uncle Steve or, my friend from high school, Tommy. I think one of the biggest mistakes is going out and asking people for their opinion, right? Because you have stuff coming in from the left, stuff coming in from the right. And at one point, you just get so much that you just are sensory overloaded and you're like, I'm just going to do nothing. And I feel like that's the biggest mistake people make, is not really deciding for themselves. They want to fit this mold. And you ask a 65-year-old person, you walk into the room, oh yeah, like, you're a nurse, you got a good retirement, that pension. It's like, you don't understand. That's your mindset 50 years ago that might have worked. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's like, this is paycheck to paycheck. And when I retire in 9 years with $1 million, okay, how long is that going to last me in San Diego? It's going to last me about
Mm-hmm.
12 years. Now, $1
Mm-hmm.
million isn't a whole hell of a lot in 2025, let alone when I'm 65 and a half. So
Yeah,
I think asking the wrong people for advice is what holds people back in the beginning.
couldn't agree more. Don't take advice from people who aren't doing the things you want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very easy in life. Like no one is, when you get around people that are very successful, you understand that these people are no smarter than you and I, right? They've just went a different path and had a lot of conviction in themselves. And they look at someone's life who they want and they just copy and paste the blueprint. And it is simple as that. It is simple as having a clear vision and showing up every single day and just betting on yourself and being consistent.
So how has life been after nursing now? You quit a few months ago. How long ago was it? 6?
Juneteenth was actually my last day, the day I quit. Yeah. So I had actually not worked like really for like the last 9 months. I had a back injury at work, and we talked about this earlier on our call. Like, hey, what are we gonna talk about on the podcast? But I went from hero to zero real quick as soon as I was injured. So there was a confused patient who needed a safety sitter. You got to pay that person a wage, and hospitals don't like to spend money on those things. So the patient fell, hurt themselves, and I hurt myself trying to help them. So the last 9 months, I've kind of been back and forth battling this back injury. I had a bulging disc, 2 herniated discs, and you can see these, like, this is very common in nursing. People just
Mm-hmm.
eating cereal bowls full of Advil before every single shift because of how much pain, like, we really have to go through to put our bodies to take care of these people. So at that point, I really stopped working. And I'd say about 3.5 months ago, I went back to work on modified duty. So what this means is that they still have to pay me because it's within the rights of my contract, but I don't take a patient assignment. So I'm doing chart audits. I'm doing, making sure that safety signs are up and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting in these break rooms. I'm just listening to these people just talk crap and just be negative and just gossip about this person and that person. And something just clicked. And I was just like, what am I doing with my life? And so I stepped outside. I called like one of my friends, right? Called my mom. And she's like, you got it, bro. Like, I support you. So walked in, quit. It just felt right. It was just divine timing. So I'm about 3.5 months, 4 months away from actually fully exiting the bedside. And I think the best person to ask that question to is my girlfriend. And she'd say that I'd come home every single day without my blood pressure through the roof, just grabbing the first bottle of liquor that I can find just to take the edge off the day. And I find myself much happier, much more peace, much more purpose. And I feel like I have a vision for where I want the rest of my life to go, or at least, the next decade. And that was just impossible when every single day I was coming home just feeling defeated. Life is
Yeah.
definitely for the better.
Hell yeah, dude. Nurses are used to like these long hours and like having a sense of no control and very high stress. So how does it feel now to like own your time and be able to build something to yourself?
That's a great question. So I was eating lunch the other day and I just had this flashback to I was doing CPR on this woman one time and it had to be like 12 or 1 or 2 or something like that. And I remember just doing CPR on her and breaking her ribs, right? And unfortunately the patient didn't make it. And, we pay our respects, to the patient and then we leave. And then I remember the charge nurse just said, okay, Ian, like you're forced to take a lunch right now. So I had to go from literally pounding on someone's chest, trying to restart their heart, pushing so hard that I can feel and hear their ribs cracking underneath my hands to go eat a sandwich. I just how does this exist?
Yeah.
People don't understand, the emotional capacity. You only have so much. So to your point, you compartmentalize it, but now it's like how different my life is. I get to choose, what time I get to the office and what time I get to eat lunch. And I'm not doing CPR before I eat my sandwich. And although I work much, much more and much longer days, it's truly in something that I love. And I think there's truth in if you really love your job, you never work a day in your life. And I'm starting to see that be my reality now.
And that's the one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize either is you think you're going to work less when you leave your job, right? But when you do entrepreneurship or business, you actually work way more. And these hours are never ending. That's one of the hard things I've realized too is, once you leave the hospital, like there's no phone calls or anything like that. But with the real estate stuff, you're always connected to your phone. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. So and this is another adventure. This is the next chapter of my life. This is an adventure because it's uncharted territories. And just how I had to learn almost a decade of how to balance nursing in my life, I'm trying to balance being an entrepreneur in my life. And I'm just surrounded by so many good people in my life now that just bring me up with them. And again, I'll always give my time to somebody else who has nothing of value to give to me, because people who I couldn't give any value to sat down and had coffee with me and pointed me in the right direction. So it's definitely a balancing act of, for the next 5 years, how fast do I have to go? How far do I want to go? How quick do I want to go? What's my appetite for risk? What's the velocity of return on my capital that I want to look for? So these are things that I'm still very early on in my journey trying to figure out. But I find that although I work, 80-hour work weeks now, it's much more manageable than 36 hours at the hospital.
Are there any specific skills that you think have translated from nursing into business?
I think the ability to work with people. I think that one thing that attracts people to healthcare is that you're working with the patient, right? This is a human being. We're not sitting at desks, not at computers, and you learn a lot of people skills, right? And I think now that, I'm syndicating, large development deals and working with investor capital, I think one of the biggest tools that I took from nursing is learning how to control people's expectations and learn how to stay calm in a chaotic environment. And again, bringing back to, when I first got into ground up development, my first deal, I wired all my money like, hey, my partner said, sit down and buckle up. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. But maintaining this sense of security and safety despite being chaos is one of the biggest things that I took from critical care nursing.
I couldn't agree more, man. So I just want to switch up gears now and just kind of talk about the real estate development. We've talked about nursing and healthcare for majority of the show so far, but I really want to talk about development. So what made you choose it specifically? Because as we all know, there's a million different ways you can make money. You could do fix and flips, you could do single family. So what made you choose development? Was it just your interaction that you had with that developer that one day, or was it something else?
I think going back and asking yourself, okay, who's got the lifestyle that I want and what do they do? right? So ground up development really attracted me because it's very time intensive and capital intensive in the very beginning. But once you
Hmm.
build these assets and stabilize these assets, now it's a very passive game, or you pay for that passivity. You hire a property manager, a security guard, you handle someone to operate the day to day, and now you just own this asset that pays you mailbox money for life on the first of every single month, appreciates in the background like wildfire. This is now your 401k, your retirement account, and also gives you endless tax benefits where you not only get to make a lot of money, but you get to keep a lot of money. So ground up development kind of checked all those boxes for me. And I think the biggest is just I feel like a kid again with like little blocks and like building shit. I feel like it's the coolest thing. And now that I'm seeing projects develop, it's like this was just a picture on an iPhone and now it's in
Hmm.
front of me. So just seeing that, like I can literally make something out of nothing, I think is really magical, and it brings back kind of like my inner child. So I think that's really cool that I can actually make money doing this in a career.
What's your vision for the kind of development? Do you plan to just develop these big multifamily apartments and then sell them right away, or is it just to build them, reposition them, and then maybe sell them in like 3 to 5 years?
Great question. I think time is the best indicator of that, right? So again, like man makes plan, God laughs at that. I can say, hey, I want to hold on to everything that I build, but the reality is you just run out of money. And my partners now have been really successful doing this. They said, hey, listen, we can only own so much of San Diego before we have to start selling stuff off, right? So at one point you become so asset rich but cash poor that you're forced to make those decisions. And I think I'll make those in due time. Cross that bridge when I get there. But the idea is to own these things for the long term. Why are 90% of millionaires created through real estate? Is because what I said. You have loan pay down, you have amortization, you have appreciation, you have tax benefits. Real estate appreciates, but we're allowed to tell the IRS that it depreciates. So
Hmm.
I think that owning these assets for the long term is the way to go. And you don't need to own too much real estate. You only need to own 2, 3 apartment complexes, 14 to 20 units to really be set for life and to have your kids set, hoping that the next generation doesn't sell them all off and do something crazy. They say 3 generations to build up wealth, one to ruin it. So that is my vision, is to own, and I'm going to steal this from my partner Carl. I want 3 kids, so I need 4 buildings. I want to own them
Love
outright,
that.
one for each of my kid and then one for Paulina.
Love that, man. Talk about just some of these deals that you're involved in.
Yeah, and I'll keep it like very layman's terms because I know like a lot of people here aren't really in real estate, or they might be nurses, whoever in my network. But essentially, what we do is we take real estate to its highest and best use. So that can mean one of 100 different things, and all of those different lanes make money. But what we specifically do is we take a single family home that is basically a family home, and it's zoned for multifamily use. So multifamily is just a fancy word for apartment complex. So what we do is we buy a house at a low cost basis, meaning that we're not paying a ton for the real estate or the asset. And then we convert the single family home into a 14 to 25 unit complex. And we add so much value that the equity created in the deal basically is enough for us to take out permanent debt, aka a mortgage, and to not have to come to the table with any more of our own money. So we take a poor performing single family home, we draw plans in it with our architect, and then after 1 year, once we get approved plans by the city, we bulldoze it and build up. So we can either hold on to those for the long term for cash flow. That's when your tenants pay rent, or we can sell those.
And I'm gonna ask a lot of stupid questions because I have no idea about development, but
Hit me with it, bro.
why would a single family home be zoned for multifamily? Is it just that it's already grandfathered in, or is this something that you're doing to do rezoning?
Great question, right? So a lot of the city planning is 100 years old, right? So before San Diego was San Diego, city planners sat down. They say, how do we want our city to look? Right. So as you can see, if you've never worked in real estate or been in real estate, if you drive down a highway, a lot of the times, you can see a lot of apartment complexes on the side, right? Or if you drive in the
Hmm.
beach towns, all of the area by the beach, it's like these large, condos and high rises, right? So those were zoned specifically because the planners of San Diego way back when wanted it to look like that. So to answer your question, a lot of the city was zoned in a certain way, but it doesn't mean that that was utilized way back when either. So a lot of where we develop is about 10 minutes east of the ocean. And that's where essentially poor people couldn't afford to live by the beach. So that's where they're forced to build their single family homes. So they wanted to live there because the real estate was so cheap, but they had no idea that their house could have been, or maybe they did, but they didn't have enough money to build, but utilized for mixed zoning as well. So to answer your question, city planning determines a lot of the base zoning that exists today. And then two, what's interesting in Southern California, in California in general, is the lack of housing supply and the increased demand. So the city has to come up with ways to incentivize developers to build more houses. So by doing this, they rezone a lot of areas of the city to allow for high density development, which is what me and my partners do.
So you're only targeting specifically maybe single family or duplexes that are already zoned multifamily or mixed use.
Correct. Yeah. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are just following the blueprint that works for everybody else. And everybody and their mother is going after the same deals that we are. So what separates you from the pack is, your reputation, which is everything in this game.
I know San Diego is really big on the multifamily and ADU stuff. Do you think it's ever going to become too saturated?
I don't think so. Right now, San Diego is 90,000 units behind schedule, right? So it's no secret that people want to live in Southern California. They will pay here, even the taxes, the sunshine tax. I myself, I can say everybody, I'll go homeless before I move back to the East Coast. It's always going to be home, but the weather is what keeps me here. So there's always going to
Mhm.
be a demand of people that want to live here, but we're so far behind on the supply. And that's why house prices are just through the roof. A lot of people get pushed out of here, and we can see this even sweeping across the nation. We're turning into a renter nation because the price of houses this day is just astronomical. So basically, what's the solution to this? How can we create more housing without inflating house prices? We can build tiny homes. So California was one of the first states to basically utilize ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which are essentially tiny homes in your backyard that were used for, your grandmother or in-law suite, granny flat, whatever you want to call it. Now they're looking at not only building those and having those for rental income, but now you can sell those off like houses, making it much more affordable for the average Joe.
So you're finding these deals. How are you funding them? Because it seems as though building these extravagant 15 to 30 unit things are extremely expensive. Are you just raising money? Are you putting a lot of equity yourself?
Great question. Yep. So the startup, this is very expensive to do these projects, right? We're talking millions of dollars here. Basically, what happens is you have to identify a property, and for easy numbers, we'll say the property is $1 million. So if we have to put 20% down on that property to get it, that's $200,000 right there. We want to design a 20-unit apartment complex where maybe we'll exit at a $3 million profit. So you're talking about down payment. You're talking about carry costs for that first whole year. It takes about a year to get plans and permits approved in San Diego. So you're paying that mortgage for those 12 months. So we have down payment, we have carry costs for 12 months, and then we have entitlements, which is plans, permits, city fees, et cetera. So that startup capital can range anywhere from 400,000 to 1.2 million given the 15 to 30 unit range that we work in. So the amount of capital is very intensive upfront, and we typically raise that from investors. So we can either go into our own pockets for it, but like I said, at one point, you just run out of money. You're so land rich, cash poor, that now you need to go raise investor capital, which is why we started our fund. Kind of two birds, one stone, to help healthcare workers grow their money 5 times faster than their 401k, but also because we can do a lot more pooling other people's money together.
And how long does it typically take? You said it takes a year to get the plans and permitting and all that stuff. And how long does construction typically take?
Yeah. So it's about a year after you close on the property to get plans and permits stamped by the city. Says, okay, you want to build this, we'll let you. And then the next phase is construction. It takes about 12 months to actually build out the thing. We built a 16-unit complex in 10 months, actually. So it's about a year plan and permit, a year for construction, and then 6 months, which is called stabilization. So if you want to sell this to the next buyer, right? They don't want to buy an empty building. They want to buy cash flow. They want to see a stabilized asset with tenants in there and signed leases, guaranteeing them income. So when they purchase your property, they are getting that cash flow. So again, year plan and permit, year to build it, and then 6 months to stabilize. But it takes us about 30 to 60 days to stabilize because we own a property management company and we have a long list of applicants that are on wait lists to get into our units.
Hmm.
24 to 30 months, I'd say, is the sweet spot.
Yeah. So definitely the long game, not like a house flip where it could be 4 months to 6 months.
Correct. Yes.
Nice. And what is the financing? I know you said you raised capital, but what kind of loans are you using to get these projects started?
Yeah, great question. So we basically acquire a property, or like our acquisition loan is anywhere from a conventional 20% down. If it's just a single family home and hey, we can't do anything with it, like we're just gonna, this is say our mortgage is $10,000 a month, but the property
Hmm.
generates 5,000, right? And we don't need to do anything to the property. We're just gonna bleed 5 grand a month for a whole year until we get plans and permits approved. So that could be a conventional loan. But if we get something that says, hey, this is underperforming, we can put 20 grand into it and now have rents cover our full mortgage payment so we're not losing money every single month, then we'll acquire it with a fix and flip loan. So
Mm.
conventional or fix and flip loan for the first 12 months. Once we have plans approved, you go to a construction bank, right? Or any bank that gives construction loans. But then you say, hey, I want to build out this. Here's my track record. Here's my experience. This is how much money I have in my bank account, liquidity. Give me a loan to build out X, right? So that might be
Hmm.
15,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet. So you multiply how much square feet you're adding by the price per square foot, and that is essentially your construction loan. So you go acquisition loan to construction loan, and then after everything's built and now you added value, your property is now worth X amount more. Now you refinance into permanent debt, which is a 30-year loan.
Are these construction loans very similar to bridge loan or hard money where it's anywhere from 10 to 12, 12, 10 to 13?
Yeah, it's more or less how much equity you have in the deal, right? So that's why it's best to shop around lenders. So, for example, I put a significant amount of money into my 17 unit that I'm building, and I'm tapped out. I'm like, listen, but guys, like this is everything I have to my name. I got less than 5 grand in my checking account, but but the lights are still on. Thank God that I'm doing this with my partner, Paulina. Love her to death, but there's always the risk for what's called a capital call. So
Hmm.
when you put down money on a property, right, the average rule of thumb is about 20%. So if you're taking out a $5 million construction loan, same thing. The lenders typically going to want to see 20% of equity. So if they don't find enough equity in your property, you're going to need to come out of pocket with cash as equity so they feel safe lending you. They want to mitigate their risk as possible. So to lend to you, they want to see 20%. So you do the math.
Hmm.
What's 20% of 5 million? It's $1 million. Typically, capital calls always exist, but essentially, you want to structure a deal where it's so good that you create so much equity in the interim that you won't need to come out of pocket to get that construction loan.
And all these lenders, do they typically only lend to people who have experience?
Yep, I'd say the first thing is experience, the second is track record, and then the third is liquidity. So they need to know that you know what they're doing. Banks, just like you take a single family home, right? Like the '08 crash, banks hated taking possession over these assets, right? People stopped paying their mortgage, and now that the bank owns the house, like the person who's living in it pays it down. Now the bank has to take that back. Now they have to go to an auction, sell it. Banks aren't auctioneers. They don't like doing this stuff. They just want to make their interest, make their points up front, and that's it. So you're taking out a $5 million construction loan. They're not just going to give you $5 million, right? They want to know that you've done this so many times and been so successful because they don't want to have to take over ownership of your project and then build it out to finish it. They simply just want to get paid, go back, and that's it. The longer you do this and the more you can prove that you know what you're doing, the better terms you get for borrowing that money. It's going to cost you less money to borrow money.
That makes sense. So, if someone's totally brand new and wants to get into development, what's your biggest piece of advice? Just partner or try and find someone who is obviously already has the experience and provide them as much value as possible so that they're able to take you under their wing and just kind of you can lean on their experience.
I think that's the best is just doing anything, right? So you thought about nursing school, right? We learned how to put an IV, we learned how to do this. Bro, it's like we weren't able to poke anybody with any needles until we were actually day one on the floor. So the only true way to do something is to do it, right? So if you want to
Hmm.
get into ground up development, just get into the goddamn game. Like stop getting on the sidelines. They say analysis paralysis is what keeps people on the sidelines, and it's so true. So if you don't feel comfortable risking your capital and getting into these deals, find someone who's done it 100 times and do whatever you can. You might not have the most favorable equity split, but whatever, you're not going to lose money. You're likely going to profit. It may not be the lion's share that you want, but knowledge is much more valuable than any cash that you can make in this game, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that, and then just spend an endless amount of time, energy, and resources investing in yourself, getting into masterminds, communities, shaking hands with people that have fucked up, that have been really successful, learning from them. Just shake as many hands as possible.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I think that sometimes I'm like I need to have X amount of deals before I actually can get into development. But you're saying you can just get into it right away.
Self-limiting belief alert. Yeah, just get out there, man. Just bet on yourself, because at the end of the day, it's, I'm 33 years old and I think about this all the time. I have my net worth tied up in my 17-unit project, right? This could either
Mm-hmm.
make me or break me. This could be the stepping stone of wealth that, my first big taste of wealth that I'm building in my life, or it could mean I start at rock bottom. But the life I want comes at a premium. And the older that we get, the more expensive that premium is. So if I risk it all and I'm 33 years old and I lose everything, what am I going to do? I'm going to show up the next day, get right the fuck back to work. I'm going to believe in myself. I'm going to hit the ground running. And I've lost $100,000 in real estate before. Not too
Mm-hmm.
many people know that, but I feel like it's important to share your failures just as much as your successes, to show you that, don't let one bad deal or one bad partner take you out of the game. You just need to have belief that you can do this. And in any entrepreneurial realm, with its real estate or, business, whatever, you might have 8, 9, 10 failed businesses or ideas before you get to the right one. But being an entrepreneur means that you're willing to accept the cost of that defeat, because every single time you get a loss, you're way closer to your next win, and you only got to be right
Mm-hmm.
once.
I agree. I think you just got to share all your wins, all your losses, and just don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's ultimately how you keep learning.
It's easier said than done, man. I'm not going to lie. Like, once I've lost some money, I'm like, oh my God, like, how, because that's your identity. My first bad investment, I lost, $35,000. The money, in an absolute sense, it wasn't going to change my life, but in a relative sense, that was a third of my net worth. And what I had to
Mm-hmm.
do to make this money, this wasn't won at a casino. This wasn't given to me by my parents. I had to work 5, 6, night shifts a week in a COVID ICU, just taking care of people on a ventilator that were ultimately just going to die to get this money. So there was emotional sentiment attached to that. But it took a lot of time to realize, there's this quote by Marcus Aurelius I love so much. And he says, "What are you so afraid of losing when nothing in this world belongs to you?" And the more you detach from anything, the closer you are, I feel like, at finding the source of what your goal is in life, and detach from owning that money, because that money that I lost, that I thought was devastating at the time, was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. If I had sunk, 10 times more into this black hole of a project where, I kind of messed up the first time, I never would have gotten to the communities. I never would have slowed down and focused on learning. I never would have met my current partners. I never would have opened up a capital fund. Everything, all misfortunes that you have in life are misfortunes because not enough time has passed yet for you to look back and say that was the best thing that could ever happen to me. So don't be
Mm-hmm.
afraid of risking. Don't be afraid of losing. Nothing really belongs to us at the end of the day. None of us are making it out alive. So just bet on yourself. As long as you have conviction and you're trying to do right by yourself, by your partner, and someone else, what else can go wrong?
Well said, bro. Well said.
He's hit the mic drop.
Can you speak to that 100,000 that you lost really quick?
Yeah, so I tried to buy a villa in Bali a couple years ago. I put down 10%. Emotional decision. I shook hands and wired a guy 35K. And like any moron, I'm like, yep, I don't need a contract. Like, I believe you. You're a cool guy. And long story short, this guy, I don't want to talk bad about him. Mind you, all 10 fingers point back at me. This is all my fault, not his fault, all my
Mm-hmm.
fault. But I trusted him. He kind of sold himself as this hotshot developer when really he was just kind of new to the game and shooting from the hip. So 35K, I was just in Bali a couple weeks ago and I went to see him. And for years, I had all this resentment built up against this money again for what I had to do to make this money. But year after year, I'm like, I'm going back to Bali. I'm like, I hate being here. It just reminds me of this. Like, it took away from, my favorite place in the world. So when I saw him, I actually told him I forgave him. And I told him I was proud of him. And it was just like this tension in the room just like dissipated. And that was day 3 of my trip. And I left that villa, that project, that failed project. Only one of 4 villas was completed when all 4 were supposed to be completed a year ago. I left that project feeling like just, oh my God, I let go of so much. So again, it was a lesson in hindsight. And no amount of money is worth, you trying to be angry at somebody. So that was 35K. And then I have $60,000, a terrible investment in Pahrump, Nevada, which is essentially an opportunity zone where I essentially did a hard money loan and they defaulted on my note. Great. Look at me. I was going to make 15% of my money, but now I own two dirt lots in the middle of the desert that nobody wants to buy. So I'm kind of stuck there. So I'm going to have to fire sale those and sell those at a significant loss. But hey, another lesson learned. And
So you bought two pieces of land with a hard money loan, and nothing ever came of, like you were trying to do development.
developers who were developing 2,000 pieces of land, 2,000 parcels, reached out to me. Again, they were asset rich, cash poor. So to develop these houses on these lots, they were looking for private money lenders, and they were going to give me a 15% return on my money in 1 year. So that essentially, that date came and went. No money was returned to me. So now I own two dirt lots out there, and I can make some money on it. And I probably will in the future. But for right now, for the last 2.5 years, that's $60,000. I could have turned into 360,000. So the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity cost that money's locked up, I kind of count that as like money lost, but it's still sitting out there. I will make money in some capacity, but at what point, I don't know.
So looking back now, do you think you should have done more due diligence, building credibility, whatever, with these operators, or how could that have been avoided, or how could you make this better in the future if you do decide to try and do that again? Because I know a lot of people are always asking to be private money lenders, and it seems like a really good thing to do, but just from your experience, that could obviously go very sideways. So what advice would you be giving to someone who may be interested in doing this private money thing?
Study the game before you get into the game. You're going to learn how to swim before you jump in the ocean, right? So me, I just jump. Like, patience is something I struggle with on a daily basis. I want everything to happen yesterday. From nursing, trying to bulge my way into an ICU where I didn't know anything. It's like, hey, you got to get your fundamentals first, right? And you can hurt a human being, but you can hurt your bank account in this game. You know what I mean? So it's necessary to realize that you're not ready yet, and to have that discipline and that belief that you're going to get there, but you need to wait. And I feel like I always have shiny object syndrome and fear of missing out. That's, all my friends in Bali bought land at a song and a dance during COVID, and I was on the sidelines getting FOMO for years. So whenever I realize I'm getting FOMO, that's like my ultimate sign to be like, back off, like stop, just stop dead in your tracks. So the piece of advice I would give to anybody who's looking to get into private money lending is make sure you know how private money lending works. Know how to
Mm-hmm.
mitigate risk. If you're lending on a construction project, guess what? You're going to have to buckle up and learn construction, because you're going to have to see if this deal pencils and how much risk is involved in that relative to the amount of money you're going to make on your own money.
It's refreshing to hear you say all this, because I don't know, I've been a part of many communities, and you see all these influencers and gurus on Instagram saying just, action first, then learn, which I agree to an extent, but you also got to learn a little bit first.
I think there's a healthy balance between the two, for sure. I think take action in deciding that, okay, like I'm going to get into real estate, I'm going to leave the bedside, or maybe just start, the plan, the 2-year plan. And again, from realtor to developer, that plan may change, but just start with the plan. So I believe when they say take action, it's the first and most important thing. Totally believe in that. But when you're talking about like a lot of money and capital, which will then prevent you from conquering your mission, if you lose that, I think there's where the difference maker is. But yeah, take action, but shake hands. Learn from people that have failed, because they are the
Mm-hmm.
best teachers, because they don't want to see you make the same mistakes that they did.
So what's your 5 to 10 year vision for everything?
Great. So 5 to 10 year vision is just to attach onto all of my fellow healthcare workers. I actually was going to wear a pair of scrubs for this episode. I was going to have a button down shirt and rip it off, like all dramatic, just as a badge of honor to honor, my fellow nurses that are on the front lines. But my 5 to 10 year vision is to create this capital fund. The fund is up and running, to grow this capital fund, to show people, to educate people that if you want to retire at 50 or 55 or 45 or 35, it is possible, but you just need to be open to learning new ways. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we were always marketed the 401k and, the pension and all that stuff. But now you see people are working till 70, and then it's still on a fixed income. Is that going to give me the life that I want? No. So I hope in the next 5 to 10 years to create a capital fund with my network of nurses and doctors, and make them X what they're making in their traditional investments, to buy it back their time, to start taking care of themselves after spending a career taking care of others. To really change people's lives is my mission. And first, I need to do it myself to show that I'm living proof that, hey, this works. And then 2, I'm just going to go, as fast as I possibly can, trying to bring up as many people with me as possible.
I love everything you're doing. I resonate with so much you're doing, and I love helping other people. And I know that although we may not helping people directly with their health, I think just the things that we bring to people's lives and the changes that we may help them make, and these realities that may click when they're like, there's life outside of nursing or healthcare. I think that just fires me up, and I know it really does for you as well.
Yeah, and your dream of being a hotelier, man, like you're gonna get there, dude, and you're gonna bring a lot of people with you, and you're gonna do a lot of good in this world. You don't always need to be at the bedside emptying a Foldy bag to, feel like you're making a difference. For someone to come to me and say, thank you, you really changed my life, you really gave me hope. That's what fills my cup, and that's what's going to keep me waking up every single morning ready to hit the skids. Excuse me,
Well,
not
Ian,
hit
I
the skids. That means
appreciate.
slow down. Hit the accelerator, the opposite.
Yeah. Well, Ian, I appreciate you so much for sharing your story and showing people what's possible in life after nursing, especially when you bet on yourself. How can the people get a hold of you and connect with you?
Yeah, so I tell everybody, listen, what can I do to help you now? So I don't care if you're in Africa, I don't care if you're in Kentucky, I don't care if you're in Los Angeles or San Diego. If I can help you in any way possible, if I can help you get to the next point in your life, if I can help guide you in any way at my really, really early stage of my journey, just reach out to me. I'll even give my cell phone number on the podcast. It's 570-233-8328. Just text me a heads up saying you heard me on the podcast so I have some context, but reach out to me. My email is ianpatrickduffy@gmail.com. It's my personal one, or ian@scrubs2estates.com. But the best place to reach me is just my Instagram, which is Scrubs2Estates. It's my handle with a 2, not T-O. So DM me if you're interested in anything we had to say today. Again, I don't care if you have nothing of value to give to me. I know that I have something to give to you. So reach out, and I'm happy to help any way I can.
And Ian also has an amazing podcast that I will share in the show notes also. So hope you guys tune into that show also. If this episode spoke to you guys or you found any value at all, please share it with another, whether that be just someone who's just feeling burnt out, feeling stuck in their job, anyone who can find value. As always, keep growing, keep taking action. And I thank you guys so much for tuning in. See you guys in the next one. Peace.
Peace.